So a couple of days ago, I had the privilege of sitting down with two members of Codex's engineering team. I got to talk with Thibaut, who's pretty well known as an engineering lead at Codex, and also with Ed, a design engineer. Our focus really isn't the code. So if you're like not a developer, this is still going to be super interesting for you. Instead, what we focused on is how does Codex change how OpenAI works? And in particular, when you're talking to someone from a non-technical background like Ed and a technical background like Thibaut, how do our workflows shift? How does what we build change when you have Codex as effectively a teammate? What does that look like in practice? I think we often talk about AI native organizations, but I wanted to take this chance to sit down with a truly AI native organization with OpenAI and actually learn how they use Codex day to day and how it's changing everybody's workflows, not just the technical teams. So jump in. This is going to be a fun one. Well, maybe first, I'd love to hear a little bit from you guys about who you are, how you came to OpenAI. I know that everyone has their own story here, and I'd love to hear a little bit about yours.
Yeah.
Let me start, Ed.
Yeah, I'm a designer on Codex. Been in OpenAI just over a year. Been on Codex for about 6 months. Before that, worked in the research team. And yeah, I've always worked at the intersection of design engineering, and research. Worked in robotics before at Google and a few other things before that.
Yeah, I worked at Google as well. Finally, I didn't know we shared that piece of history. Always figuring things out. So at Google, very briefly, moved into DeepMind. Worked there for many years, and then decided to do the big jump and go to the US and come here and work for OpenAI. That was about a year and a half ago. That was pre-reasoning. A year and a half ago, that was
Isn't
pre-reasoning.
that weird?
Yes. And so in typical OpenAI fashion, joined just before that happened, was part of the O1 sprint.
Yeah.
I was more trying to be useful in any way possible. And then after that, kind of stuck around, built some tooling for research, became super obsessed late last year around, hey, maybe models are going to continue to improve and their capabilities are, going to continue to impress us. And maybe actually we should think more about the products, the infrastructure around it to really benefit from those models. And then started prototyping. You were working on similar things.
Yeah.
And we were not working together initially, and then we joined efforts earlier this year.
Yeah.
And that was sort of how Codex got started.
Yeah.
So you guys were there from the beginning with Codex.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's had a long history, right? Right, coding agents at OpenAI, the name Codex is a throwback to a model, which was pre-ChatGPT, I believe, right? So coding agents have been around, but Codex as it is now is...
Yeah, Codex is the product that was released, in April this year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So one of the things, I'll just ask you what I get asked about Codex, because we get to chat and we get to find out. This is the number one question I get asked is, how do engineers at OpenAI use Codex day to day?
I got two different patterns. It's one is everyone just doesn't have a choice on the code is reviewed by Codex. No matter whether you want it, reviewed or not. It's just been so useful at catching issues. And then there's a lot of casual usage by even non-technical staff. And then what we're also seeing is at the complete end of the spectrum is really power users of Codex that deploy a lot of compute, a lot more than we saw even a couple of months ago. And this continues to increase and increase and increase. And with increasingly complex workflows, some of them multi-agent, running for many hours. And so it's a highly personal thing. Still feel it's very evolving.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so as I say, I'm a designer on the team, so work very closely with engineers, but I'm very much in the code base a lot myself. And, I think the cool thing about Codex and these recent models over the past few months is they really have been a step change. And what you've seen, I think, even since we launched our most recent product suite, is basically everyone at OpenAI using it. There's one engineer that I know who uses it for everything, for note taking, for it's basically his primary interface to his computer. As a designer, I'm seeing more and more in our work in progress channel on Slack, people posting these demos And I DM someone, I was like, I didn't need code. And he's like, I couldn't until a few months ago. So you've got kind of, design engineers like myself hopping in more, submitting more PRs and kind of getting closer to the, closer to the details. And then even new people, non-technical people, go to market staff even, people are really like hopping in, and it's just like this kind of force multiplier.
Yeah, that's exactly where I kind of wanted to chat, because I think that for a lot of organizations that remains the dream, but maybe it's something about the command line and the terminal sort of scariness that comes with that. But for whatever reason, people find themselves sort of hard limiting a lot of these technical tools to engineering teams. Sometimes that is literally at the level of the IT policy. I've been in organizations where the IT policy only allows engineers to use tools like this. And if they catch you doing this as a non-technical person, that's a violation of policy. And I think some of these older ways of working and thinking are having to evolve.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is like the lines are blurring. Like Ed, I mean, you're sort of like everywhere, like ideating about the future, but then also like very much like using Codex every day and then feeling, does it feel right? Like pulling up like, PRs and little fixes.
Yeah.
There's like how, that's sort of evolved very quickly, right?
Totally. Yeah. And I think, to your point, there's kind of one half of it, which is like, how do you bring organizations along? And you have, particularly some of these larger organizations might have some more like institutional challenges. But once you get access, I feel like it's kind of getting easier as easy as possible. So, you mentioned that it might feel like a bit of a step up for people to get on the terminal. I think the cool thing with some of our products recently is, we've shipped an ID extension. So we're not just in the terminal. We have a CLI product, which we've had for a little bit.
Right.
But, we meet people where they code. So they might be in VS Code. They might be in Cursor.
Doesn't matter.
These are the kind of IDEs. And we also have a web product. So, you can, once you kind of connect all the enterprise, kind of puzzle pieces, you can just go in a web product, type in a prompt and create a fix. So for example, say you want to change some UX copy, you're a copywriter, maybe you don't even need to look at the code. You just want to change some strings. You can just do that yourself, right? You can go in and you can type this prompt if your kind of enterprise is set up. So, I think like the number of surfaces that people are working across and just like, just makes it kind of easy and easier to get involved.
Yeah, I think that there's that ease of access piece you guys have done a nice job solving for over the last few months. I think the other piece that I heard as you were talking is that there's a little bit of a healthy constraint in something like having Codex review every PR. Like, doesn't matter. It's getting reviewed. You have to engage with it. And I think that's also going to be new for a lot of organizations I talk with.
And the thing we've been very careful about is also optimizing for like signal to noise ratio and making sure that the hit rate is very good so that people don't actually complain and like, want to turn it off. And overall, like as an organization, we're getting like way more value out of it than, potentially sometimes the misses. And then we keep like improving, the system and the model over time so that it's capable of finding more and more gnarly and like subtle issues over time. And people are genuinely impressed. It's like, I hear it all the time. Like, it's like, oh, this thing is superhuman. It's like, it's doing reviews I would never have done because I don't have the time to dig like 4 layers deep into the stack. And just having that always on, you don't have to think about it. You have that safety net that's just there.
Yeah, super interesting. Like, I think particularly something like code review, as a designer, I was thinking through the user experience, right? It's like, oh no, is everyone's just going to get loads of emails? And, it turns out that like, it's like one of the most loved features that I think we've shipped. And that one of the things that changed for me was seeing some of our top contributors across OpenAI, not just our team, commenting in our Slack saying like, this is, as you say, it's superhuman. And, I look forward to like those notifications now. It really just like, it just adds so much value.
Like, I think there are 2 things that are emerging, right? So like this ambient intelligence and code review is like one example of that, where it just happens. You don't have to trigger it. You don't have to think about it. And you just benefit from that intelligence being deployed. And then the other thing is people starting to use it as like a little assistant in their computer. Like, it's not really about code. It's like, it does like, sysadmin task, it pulls like context and, maybe the latest news for you. And, it's just like, or craft like some new designs and new ideas. And then, like for that, the current way that we're doing it in the CLI and the extension, it's like it wants to be more. And so like the current interfaces are maybe like holding things back a little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's kind of both ways, really. Like in some ways, there's this throwback to the terminal that people are getting nostalgic about. And, from a design perspective, there are these kind of two camps. One is this kind of parlor trick. It's this like transitory, kind of like form factor. And actually, there's this like, perhaps there are some like new interaction paradigms that we're like pushing towards, but perhaps aren't there yet. On the other hand, I think like the constraint of the prompt box, the terminal, like it's kind of perfect as well for a way, right? It meets you where you are. And it's very cool to see the workflows that people have built around that. So you can just spin up your terminal and you can, as you say, right, you can write notes, you can do all of these different things from just like such a simple form factor.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has surprised me, like if I go back to that idea of a non-technical use case for Codex, I find that Codex is an extraordinarily logical model. And when I'm using it for a non-technical use case, I find that there's a sharpness and a conciseness about how it evaluates a particular set of inputs that feels like I can see where it came from. It feels like, of course, you would get this from a model designed for code, but it turns out that there's an extensibility to that emergent property that helps with a lot of other things. And so, like, I did a business case analysis. And it wasn't technical, right? Like you're analyzing business inputs like revenue and you're analyzing sales figures, et cetera. But it applies that same rigor. And it turns out that you get a response that's really coherent. It's really clear. It's cogent. It makes sense. It's easy to read. And it's, as a result, very, very useful. And I love the idea that these models end up having extensible properties that perhaps spin off of what they were originally designed for and allow us to do lots of other things.
Yeah, there's that element of, hey, this model is trained to be like precise and correct about things and diligent and, double check, maybe triple check its work sometimes and not do all the math in its head, right? Or in its context and maybe write a little Python script to help itself out. I use it for data analysis like all the time. And it's not about the code anymore. Right? It's about the result and like trusting the steps. And like, as you put it, it's like a very cogent, like legible explanation. You can like see step by step, like what, why it's doing things. And then there's a question of like, at what point, for these kinds of tasks, you still need to look at the code. Is the code just a tool that you don't really care about? And then you're using that as a stepping stone. So then you have like a coding agent that's maybe evolving into like, a more general kind of assistant. I guess it's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of the use, you mentioned about kind of like, design showing up in different places. And I think the same way about some of the use cases for designers. So like on the one hand, there's like fixing the paper cuts of, because we're in these tools all day, every day, like literally 8 hours a day. Any small paper cut that you get, you just see and you can fix it. And obviously, you're submitting a PR. It needs to, you need to look at the code that you're generating, and we can go through the review process. But if I'm in like a very different mindset and I'm in like design, ideating mindset, like, yeah, maybe I can just make my terminal really small. Don't worry too much about the code. Just have a local host open and basically, just like narrow this gap from like kind of, thought to product, and really just focus on the interactions. You can move it, you can think about responsiveness and that kind of stuff becomes more important, and it becomes more like a canvas. So, similar to if you're writing a very different use case, but, also like a very different way of designing.
Yeah, because for so long, design has been effectively disintermediated from engineering. And like coming from a product perspective, so much of the role traditionally was translate design into something that has requirements that engineers can build against. And so there was always this tension between PMs and engineers and designers when I was coming up, where it's like everyone has different incentives, and really it's all just a function of disintermediation. Like if you take away the gap and you give everyone access to the code, it's a different world.
Yeah, like often it's like, hey, Ed, it's like, you're just like an engineer on the team, right? They're just like writing PRs, they're just fixing things. You don't need to go and talk to anyone. You just do it.
Yeah. And I think some of these boundaries as well, as you say, they're kind of slightly artificial. They've grown up. First we had the terminal, and then with, Mac, we then were like started to think about the GUI, and these kind of new disciplines emerged, and they're kind of just converging and diverging over time. Yeah.
You don't like being called an engineer.
Oh no. I mean, I don't know what I call myself now. I think that's the cool thing.
There's an identity crisis where it's just like, what am I?
Yeah. I think that we're getting into a world where job titles matter less and skill sets matter more. And it's exciting to see what happens when people can wear those hats lightly and just focus on what problems they can solve.
Yeah, it's really a lot. It brings a lot of clarity. It's like, it's all about the problems, figuring out what problems to solve, figuring out what questions to ask yourself. So much more is possible, and it's much more cheaper to ideate and build. And then you find yourself like being like, wow, so I really need to be crisp about what I want to go and do.
Yeah.
It's exciting, but it's also nerve-wracking at the same time. Right? Good ideas matter more.
They do, and correctly aimed ideas matter more, I think.
Yeah, the speed and velocity, right? It's like which direction you're going in.
How fast you learn. Like, this most successful teams that we see emerge at OpenAI, like really small teams that set themselves up as well to learn and iterate super fast. And then there's a general sense of oh, we're building towards this. But then also changing things is cheaper.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's the phrase, right, which has gone around in engineering for a long time, which is kind of code wins. And, you can write as many PRDs as you like, but until you have the product in your hands. And I think that's the cool thing that I've seen from product teams broadly defined, whether it's, designers, engineer. It's if there's a hackathon, at the end of a hackathon, you'll have a fully working product. You won't just have a kind of throwaway React demo like you had before, which I think is super exciting. And then the hard decision is then what do you build, which avenue do you narrow down on?
Yeah, oftentimes, you come up with a new idea, feature, an entire product, and I have to do it a double take, because it's not a static thing. It's just I'm this thing is fully functional. It's almost shippable. How did you cook this?
Yeah, the cool thing I think about this is another fun angle which probably hasn't been explored that much a little bit in kind of design engineering, which is the kind of old world is you're a designer, you work in or product manager for that matter, you work in a document, you work in a file, and it's this throwaway piece, and then you throw it to the engineer, and the engineer kind of product productionize it, right? But now, some of the demos that Thibaut was mentioning, I'll just create a fork of the repo, and it's not just a demo, it's a fully functioning thing. And obviously to move fast, I've taken some shortcuts, and there's gonna be it's gonna be a little rough around the edges, but yeah, the fidelity that you can get to is amazing.
Yeah, there's one of the pieces you just used as a throwaway line that I want to dig into a little bit. You talked about this idea that you come up with an idea and then a team forms around the idea to get that idea to fruition. And I feel like that's a little bit the story of Codex, but I think it's also a story of a new way of working. And so I'd be curious for you guys to share a little bit more about what that feels like on the inside.
It feels like we are co-evolving Codex and the way of working. And so Codex is evolving as fast as we have to adapt to, the new possibilities that it creates. And it's quite a challenge. But fortunately, one thing that's become very clear is humans are still the very best at adapting quickly to things. And isn't it quite insane to think earlier this year, none of this really existed. And now, it's very rare to find someone who still codes without a little agent by their side. So I think, we're going to continue to see that. It's pretty clear to me, small, nimble teams tend to produce incredible results. And I think that's going to continue to be true.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I think that the really interesting observation that I've seen is just, I've been so surprised at how fast people get used to these new step changes. To Thibaut's point, I also joined just before our reasoning models. And I remember at the time we were talking about, it's going to ship this reasoning model. It's obviously, the kind of sits on top of all of this research, and it's been this, really huge research project, for the company. But again, it was this low-key research preview, and it was such a step change, in so many areas. And if you think about where we are now, and I just look at how fast the different teams I've worked in over just the past 6 months, And it does just feel that kind of every few weeks or every model release, you know, we kind of like push this frontier even more. And then a week later, you know, you'll be in some agent loop and you'll get a bug and you'll be like, this model, you know, like getting frustrated. And then you're like, you forget that it's like, you know, this is insane. So it's one of those, you know, it's just like, you know, you could apply the same to, you know, image generation or video, right? You know, we shipped Sora and it's like mind blowing. And then you see this tiny fragment and you're kind of like, oh, you know, but you forget, you know, you zoom out and you just become used to these things so fast. But Cuba's one, I think the cool thing is it's just super empowering for small teams. And, you know, even some of the junior engineers that we work with who, you know, perhaps are only a few years out of university, you know, the kind of the breadth of work that they can do and the kind of big swings that they can take, you know, I think just even within the past few years has really kind of accelerated their work as well.
Yeah, we've got Ahmed on the team. He joined as a new grad.
Yeah.
Didn't know Rust, learned Rust super quickly. I've never really seen one like pick up like a new language like as fast as that and like, you know, get productive. And then it's the way that he manages to like accept the technology and the potential and like discover the true potential of agents is like, I think, faster than most people on the team. And so there's sort of like that superpower of like, how quickly are you willing to try and adopt new ways of working as well? I've seen also like veterans, like, you know, 10 years in the industry, like, you know, kind of stick to their, you know, more traditional ways of like developing. And it's tough. I'm not sure which one, like, you know, is more effective, but it's pretty clear to me, like, you know, jump like 3 months, 6 months from now, it's like, you know, it's going to be very clear which one is more effective.
Yeah.
I think, honestly, it'll be a surprise to a lot of folks to hear that there are junior engineers at OpenAI simply because there's been a widespread perception over the last 12 months that these tools can dramatically accelerate people who know enough of the business context and have the experience to utilize them. And then juniors coming in, like I hear from juniors directly saying, I, you know, can't for the life of me get a role anywhere. Because I don't have experience. And now you also need to have the ability to have that experience and leverage it with AI. And it's even harder and higher. But you guys have juniors and they're apparently doing very well. So what's that been like?
It's been awesome. I think it brings such a joy to work as well, and like fresh perspective, and then keeps like us grounded. And I have been delightfully surprised about like, you know, how well that's been working for us. And it's changed my perception as well of like, you know, what is important, like, you know, this adaptability. And then like a lot of it was as well, like Ahmed, I'm just going to take Ahmed as an example, but sorry. He was sort of like, he grew up almost with this. So it's like it's not quite true, but, you know, it will be true at some point where it's like life before coding agents, you know, background, ambient intelligence, like, you know, having a little assistant like in your terminal, like that was not a thing. And so it's just super natural to them. Like, whereas like for me and others, sometimes I'm just like, oh, you know, it's like, I'm going to go back to Vim and like, you know, just like hash it out. And like, I don't necessarily like resort to like using it in the right way. And I'm like slowing myself down in a way. And then you look at the way that, you know, they are using AI today and you get inspired. And so it's been actually really interesting like how they've been able to level up the rest of the team, who is like on paper more senior, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a combination that I've seen work very well is where we do spend a lot of time on the general architecture of a code base. You know, it's like the principle of software engineering still remain. And then once you have the right scaffolding, then you can just go and like and run and be extremely fast and proficient, because the agent will also like respect the general scaffolding and the boundaries that you've set.
So reading between the lines a little bit, it sounds like the quality of character that is most important that you guys are seeing on the ground as you work with these models, and to your point, evolve teamwork with these models. Is it around openness to experience and learning new things and the ability to adapt quickly? And that's something that really, whether you're junior, whether you're senior, whether you're technical, whether you're not technical, that's what you got to have in the AI age? Or is there something else?
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, you know, I interview a lot of designers. They're definitely qualities that I look for, you know, when hiring. But it's we're going through a bit of a step change technology wise, and I think it's just being open to those new ideas, being open to using those new tools is definitely helpful. If I think back to, I'm a child of the internet. I kind of grew up pre-internet and post-internet. I kind of feel like we're at the same point now for like software engineers, creatives, designers, kind of pre-AI, post-AI, and I'm seeing more and more people who are like maybe skeptical or like learning about it a little, as as Tiba says, kind of set in their ways. Perhaps they have their workflows, dipping their toes in and just seeing the crazy benefits, and from there, like, moving forward.
I think curiosity and willingness to engage is the one most important thing right now. And it's clear that we're only at the very beginning of, what's going to continue to evolve. Like, model capabilities are going to continue to increase. Like, we are not seeing really a sign of a slowdown. Like 5.2 that just came out, it's a very strong model, but it's also, one of, many more to come. And like, we have like a very clear research roadmap there that's like a lot of the team and the rest of it, OpenAI is excited about, but it's just to set. The reality is, like, this will continue to revolutionize how we do software engineering. So if you're not willing to accept that, it's going to be tough. And like, people who are like curious and are focused on solving problems and are out there in the world and are like, hey, just like, how can I help people's lives? How can I do this thing faster? They're the ones that are having a great time right now.
That's really been true. The stories that I know that are positive, hopeful, exciting tend to be correlated really closely to people who have like a nose for interesting problems and who have a curiosity to solve them, and just look at AI as this really cool super tool that they can use to solve those problems. Like, I know someone who, I think he started out as a music major in college, and now he's a technical founder. Because he felt like being one, right? And now you can do that. And he just went and solved problems for customers. And I think that that's one of the things that I find most interesting about the trajectory that we're on, is that those stories become more and more plausible, right?
Yeah, I think it's maybe one of the underrated parts of it, in that I think there are a lot of really valid concerns that people have, but I think the thing that people don't focus on as much is that it is an equalizer. Like, if I think of when I got into design as a kind of teenager, I was doing a lot of animation, I was kind of hand drawing things, I was like doing a lot of creative stuff, making movies with my friends, and my in the garage you had to build a green screen, you had to buy the camera, which was expensive, you had to get this. And now with like kind of $20 ChatGPT subscription, you can, as a creative, make like basically anything, right? You get access to Codex, you get access to all these other things. So in many ways, it's an equalizer, but it does require leaping in, as you say, kind of having that curiosity and really like throwing yourself in and learning all about it. But if you're curious, then there's so much.
You still have complaints that usage limits and rate limits are too low, but when you think about it, like $20 a month for like a prolific software engineer that can help you get stuff done, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's like this equalizer thing. There's like so many problems that were left unsolved before this, and now that will get solved, and that's what gets me excited.
Yeah.
I guess that brings me to another question I had. Like, you referenced earlier this idea that it's about choosing what you're going to focus on in this world because the tools are so powerful. And I think that's definitely been something I've observed. And then you just mentioned another big piece I've seen, which is that there's a whole host of problems that, for lack of a better term, are Sev 3 and Sev 4 type problems that are now accessible and legible and solvable because we have a tool that can do them. And so on the one hand, you have like more volume you can attack that's perhaps lower urgency. And on the other hand, you have a lot more value on picking your overall direction correctly. And I'd be curious to hear, like, in practice for you guys, what is that balance like? How do you guys tackle sort of those two points on the scale?
I think that two things that matter to us is general conviction that we have based on information, around like, hey, our models are going to continue to improve along, this set of capabilities. Like, let's build ahead of that so that we continue to scale and like, bring more benefit to our users. And then the second part is like, what are people asking for? And there, deploying intelligence like Hender helps us as well. Like, I was on Twitter the other day, like I started a thread like of like, hey, it's like, what should we build? Like, what's holding you back? Like, what's not delightful on Codex right now? And then got, somewhere around like
I saw that.
250. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
I saw that thread. Yeah, it was a good thread.
it's like 600 like unique ideas, but Codex helped me sift through it all and, bring it back then and based on my own priorities and my own notes, like just actually section it. And then I was able to discuss it with the team. But so, yeah, conviction and feedback are like two good ways that we go about it. Like, you have others?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good framework. I think just to mention a few other areas where where we've been building. So we have this kind of CLI product, we have this web product, and we have the ID extension. We also have some cool integrations. So you can add Codex in Slack, and you can add Codex in Linear. And with a lot of these like smaller issues that you spoke about, one really cool trend that I've been seeing is there are a lot of small tickets that the end of the year or the end of the quarter the team might struggle to get around to, or they're like always there and they're kind of coming up at the end of the meetings. And now, right, so like after you've triaged a bunch of these things, maybe there are a bunch of small ones that you could just put into one of these integrations, and you can just be like, Codex fix this, or you can literally assign it now in Linear and other products. So I think like some of the small stuff, we are starting to get to these like really kind of end-to-end workflows of, tracking a small problem, meaning like literally writing it down in, some short descriptive way, and then having a PR that you can review and choose to merge or not. And I think like being able to free up a lot of time, from focusing on a lot of that low level work, like just frees up pure resources and capacity to focus on some of those big issues. So that's been a cool trend as well, which, obviously you always have to prioritize things. You always have to, filter signal through noise and make some kind of hard decisions. But I do think that we've been able to get a lot of that low level work, almost kind of end to end automated, so that the team can like really focus on those big issues.
It also moves bottlenecks around, right? So like, as we're almost solving code generation, and you can implement any feature, like faster and faster, like suddenly you're left with deploying and maintaining the services. And, whenever like your hardware breaks or like networking has an issue, or like whatever, like million things that can happen, like now suddenly that, you get paged a little bit more, and like you're building sort of like ahead of the automation that we're able to deploy, and the intelligence is not yet capable of like doing all these things. Like, we're not able to yet have Codex deploy the service and like be on call. And this is like an area where currently we're feeling sort of like that load from having almost solved code generation.
Yeah, I was going to go there, so I'm glad you did, because to me, it's like you've 100 extra code generation or whatever you want to use the multiple for, but now you've just shifted all of that down the pipe.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it opens up some cool, interesting, interface possibilities. Like if you think about ChatGPT, right, you're conversing back and forth with a model, and you're asking for some piece of information, and it kind of presents something back to you. With a coding agent, it's taking some action in the world, and it's coming back, most often in a code base, and the kind of artifact and result of that is some code that you have to review if you want to do something useful with it. So yeah. At the moment, I think we're in this kind of like transition period where the meme is that kind of like, a lot of like software engineering is reviewing agent code. So I think like as an interface and as a problem to solve, I think that's a really interesting one to think through. It's one that we're thinking through, and it's one that I think, many people in the industry are, which is like, how do you not kind of shift the burden, as you say, from like, kind of like writing code to basically reviewing code, and how can you make that as smooth as possible? And I think we're doing some cool stuff in that space with the code review, agents and other things. But I think that's like one emerging problem that we'll have to solve soon.
One of the things that's special about code generation is like you can make it safe. So you can have all the code generated in a sandbox.
Yeah.
And you have no side effects. And so therefore, I think also like just because all the context is there. It's textual, like it's like for code, like you have Git, you have repo, like a lot of the automation already exists, a lot of the tooling already exists. So it was solved first. I think primarily due to a combination of reasons, but that's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
And you can make it safe. Like a lot of the work that we do is like we view coding agents under the lens of like, safety and alignment. And like alignment is not a solved problem, which means that whenever, you go into the world of like deployment and being on call and actually having like real world like consequences of an agent taking actions into the world, that is like a whole other game where you cannot make it yet. You cannot guarantee that the agent will not go and like delete your service or just like snoop at like user logs. And there's a whole security aspect and figuring out how to restrict a set of actions through like a safe space. Or you have to solve like the alignment problem, whichever will come first. But we're sort of like inching towards that and finding more and more creative ways so that our agents can act upon the world safely, and that you're able to steer and supervise that. I think that's like the next frontier of what we're going to unlock like in 2026. It's like code generation considered mostly solved. Code review we've been investing a lot in, and then like where are the bottlenecks now?
Yeah, that's kind of where my head goes as I look at the next year as well. I think one of the things that people tend to get curious about, and I think that will come up more and more as a conversation in 2026, is how do engineers stay fluent and able to read code structures in ways that are meaningful in a world where code generation is, to your point, mostly a solved problem? How do we keep the fingertippy skills that are relevant so that you can understand what you're deploying?
So there's this part that we didn't discuss on like code understanding and planning as well. Like how quickly can you figure out like how your system is actually functions today? And then, maybe use that knowledge in order to plan like your changes. And then after you have your changes, like how do you have them like, actually deployed and have an effect upon the world? Like, be it a product or something else. That whole like, it's not just that, but like I am more productive, you're more productive, everyone in the team is more productive. And it's also keeping up with all of that. Is like, what the hell is everyone doing? It's just like, there are new features minted every day. It's like the world is changing so quickly around just like in teams, even small teams. Like keeping up with it all is a challenge.
And with you saying that, I just want to be clear. Everyone's going to be like very discouraged to hear you say that because we're all trying to keep up.
Yeah, but we're building towards that, right? So
I know.
You want to have fast ways to like understand what's going on in the code base, like synthesize things. Is text the right way to do that? Do you want like a little report every day? How fast should your agent be in order to help you understand the state of the code?
But and to your point about kind of staying on top of I guess kind of programming as well. So not kind of like delegating everything and still deeply understanding things. Like, I've seen some cool examples. Some people internally, like occasionally kind of turn off their internet and they like, I forget the term that they use, but they're like basically kind of like, old school coding. And they're like, there's no tab complete. There's no agent, there's no codex next to them. And human curiosity doesn't go away. Like people still need to learn. Like the engineers on the team still read engineering books. I still read engineering books. So I don't think that like curiosity is going away, and I don't think like it'll become this kind of like thing that you hand it off to and you lose all the knowledge yourself. And as you say, like models can help you stay up to date as well. Like if if I'm trying to get to know a code base, I can talk to the model about it. I can ask it like how does the backend integrate here? Like, oh, like where does this component come from? Can you just explain the dependencies? Like the model itself is also like a an amazing teacher. So I think that's a cool angle as well.
When was the last time you were really surprised by an emergent property in a model?
This morning. So So yeah, I just saw someone build scaffolding around a model to enable it to work on on a problem that I thought was out of reach of the current capabilities of models, and solve it, successfully. And I was really surprised. I thought we would need to train the model specifically to be able to do this. But turns out like it generalized fairly well and worked for like almost 13 hours on this one. Yeah, just by being more creative on the tools and the setup around it. I hadn't seen this done before. So that was like really surprising to me.
Yeah, I mean, like most days, there's some things that I, probably can't say, but I think there's one that actually stuck out to me, which we, as we released it. But if you go in the web product, and you ask the model a question, and it can kind of send you some front end back. It like takes a photo of it and it like sends it back with it. And like when I first saw that, I thought that was magical, right? It's kind of using a bunch of tools, but there's something like very interesting about thinking about coding agents, being able to code, but being able to see, being able to generate these assets. And like at a conceptual level, I just found that really interesting as a creative that, this model can like do so much more than I thought.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's been one of my biggest takeaways as I reflect on 2025 is that I probably, as much as I was excited about tool use for models, and I don't think I realized the combinatorial power that gets unlocked when you start to give a model a good set of tools.
And there is something there about like what is a good set of tools, and what the approach that we've taken with Codex is, just give it access to your computer through like, good old Unix tools, right? It's like give it a shell, and let's see how far it can get by giving it a shell. And then in order to do this safely, like have it run in a sandbox.
Okay.
And then what emerges from there is, to us, like surprising, because we don't necessarily care about like, how the model is going to be able to achieve its task. And so we don't necessarily have a specific bias there, like other than like, you should probably use the shell like a bunch of times. But other than that, it's a very general tool. And that's something that we've done consciously because we believe it's like one of the more scalable ways of doing things as it scales with like the model capabilities, and it's super general.
Yeah, I think this is one of the
Go ahead.
surprising things as well on the creative side as well is like, I mentioned that there's someone that use it to write documents and things like that. And it turns out that you don't need to give it a document writing tool. You can just use regex and, like through bash commands, edit documents, write, kind of do anything. I think that was, like perhaps not surprising, but pretty amazing capability.
Like the other day, I was just like playing with something, and then we have like a Codex SDK, and then I just told Codex about it, and then it was able to just write code and like use the SDK, write a bunch of TypeScript, and then invoke itself in order to achieve more. We don't have native multi-agent in Codex, but this is a form of it that is just completely emerging because it's just read the documentation. It was like, oh, I can probably get this tool to do something for me. And it just like wrote that code, invoked it, and it just worked. Codex is very good at like figuring out ways to solve its problems.
So Codex essentially read the SDK docs, instantiated another Codex instance, and used that as a tool to get a job done.
That's right. A bunch of them, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Effectively, it bootstrapped multi-agent.
Yes. Like without us, like, thinking about it. Yeah. And so there's this thing of like throwaway code is interesting to think about it, right? It's like code as a tool. It's obviously extremely powerful. But maybe, there's just like this whole category of things where like the agent is just, writing code as like, it's not a piece of code that you should ever review as a human or like, that you necessarily care about. It's just a very general tool.
Yeah. It's code as a means, not code as an output.
Yes.
So sort of riffing off the tool piece, I've also seen sort of models with fewer but more powerful tools that are more general in nature doing better overall. So that doesn't surprise me. I'm going to the other side now, looking at the memory side of things and how long-running agentic tasks handle memory problems, both maybe sort of stateful memory you have outside the system and also in-context memory management approaches. How do you guys think about that for, like, the 20-hour task or whatever that you're running? How does memory work?
So memory is still an open research topic. Like it's clear, like something there will emerge that is better than, whatever short-term approaches, we're thinking. Like right now, as a form of memory, so, you can have the model, like the model can write to a file and then, keep track of like a lot of its state, like, through like just Markdown files, for example. Another thing that, we're doing is like for very long running sessions, like the model is like that goes beyond its context window. And so the model is forced to like summarize like what it's achieved so far and then reboot itself through like a process that we call like compaction, where at the end it's just like, okay, like let's just erase like all of the content of the context window and then summarize it. And then, you reboot and then you restart. And then you can do this many, many times. And essentially then you're able to have the model, the agent work forever. If the task like required to work forever, it would work forever. In addition to that, because it has access to just like grep and is able to like search through things, it can also dump additional context that it doesn't really need to have always in its context window, just 2 files. And that's like a form of memory. With skills as well, like, you might have skills in a file somewhere, and it's like a form of memory that is shared between the user and the agent. And you're co-evolving some common knowledge there, where it allows you to have an agent that, performs hopefully better over time. There is a problem with staleness there, where it's just like, it's sort of like a poor version and a hacky version of memory. And it does feel like this will get disrupted at some point. But that's mostly how we've seen like, it tackled, and, it's a very simple way of achieving it.
Yeah, that's one of the themes that I think is emerging as we chat a little bit more, is that you are seeing surprisingly simple primitives be surprisingly successful at solving larger generalized problems.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that a lot of people in the field have learned a long time ago. And I think it's sort of like being internalized, and it's not necessarily like common general knowledge of like, hey, keeping things simple with models that are evolving in capabilities month after month after month is probably the right thing to do, because otherwise you end up with a pile of complexity that you have to continue to adapt to the ever evolving capabilities. So that's why we decide to keep things very simple as well.
That makes a ton of sense. The other big question I want to get to, this gets back to the whole idea of like technical and non-technical folks using Codex. I get asked a lot, how do I think about my career? How do I think about career progression in a world where job titles are increasingly sort of optional hats that you can take off and put on? And it's about the problems you solve. What is the career conversation inside OpenAI, and how does co-evolving with the model shape that?
Yeah, how do you feel about this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think like, I think one kind of emerging trend that I'm seeing among designers, and to an extent some engineers as well, which I personally think is a positive, positive direction, which is kind of what I spoke to earlier with this kind of idea of kind of equalization, is there's less of a focus on kind of credentials and going through certain routes, right, to get to kind of, ascend certain kind of peaks of credentials, and more a kind of focus on kind of what you've done and what you can show, and kind of like, code wins. So particularly in the design community, what I'm seeing is a lot of people are kind of building really exciting things, putting them out there. And from a career perspective, building up profiles and, kind of like work through what they've done and what they show. And no one cares where they went to school, and all of those other things perhaps of the past, which sometimes good, sometimes, bad from like from kind of a credential point of view. So I do think there is definitely a kind of like learning through doing, and kind of, kind of proving through, what you've done, which I think is an exciting trend. And I think also, a lot of like creator economy and, the rise of, podcasts and personal media is kind of similar, right? It's just like anyone can kind of do, you can just do things is the internal phrase. But you can just kind of, do things and show your skills through that direction. So I think like that's personally one trend that I've seen. To broader trends, I don't know if I have as much of a perspective there, but
Yeah. Yeah, I think you can just do things is very much a mantra. The second mantra we have is like, I am also curious about this.
yeah.
That's sort of like the two things that people, exhibit at OpenAI. I would say it's less a challenge on career progression at OpenAI. It's, we look at impact, and that's sort of like, how you progress. It's been a challenge on, interviewing and finding the right people, because the traits that you're looking for and, like how you can succeed has sort of like broadened. Before it was like, do you program well? It's like, oh, let's give you a series of like programming tasks and like, really hard ones. And, we're going to pick the best talent there. But now it's not that easy anymore. It's like, you can actually be very successful, if you're like not going to traditionally be like a top performer at like, hard programming like tasks. And so like being able to find a talent and be more creative here has been a challenge for us. And like, we're sort of like evolving our thinking there, but it's been very interesting.
Do you guys have a silver bullet for the persistent issue we see with interviewing, where people will have ChatGPT up on the side and will just be kind of reading responses back in the interview?
Yeah, I mean, we bring people on site for a lot of the interviews, and then it's also just a reality of like, hey, in the job, you're going to use AI all the time, so it's more of the interview itself needs to evolve, and maybe not, limiting like, the tools that people can use.
Yeah, I think it's like one way of thinking is like, how are you using AI to get around some constraint? And then another is thinking a bit in an empowering way. And, you need to hit certain baselines. You need to, you need to have certain skills in place, but also kind of, are you open to using tools, and how can you understand how those can give you leverage?
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of one of Jeff B's favorite interview questions, where he asks people, how do you solve a problem that has sort of two obvious solutions? Like I want to have a higher quality car that goes faster, right? How do you do that? And you have to pick which one to optimize for. And the trick is, you're supposed to invent your way to both. You're supposed to think outside the box. You're supposed to think around the constraint. You're supposed to push on both. And that part of it is just measuring the willingness to break the mental box.
Yeah, and is the point there that, if you were using AI on the side, like, you wouldn't come up with like a creative
I
answer?
don't know that it's necessarily that. I think
Yeah.
sometimes I've seen that. I think the best way I've seen to push people off script, let's assume a remote, right? Because I think on-sites are critical, but we'll take that as read. If it's a remote interview, I think the most effective tool I've seen is really to push off the standard behavioral interview script pretty fast, and push people into a really honest conversation that demands some higher level trade-off thinking. And they don't really have time to feed it into a model and get a response in real time. And you see pretty quickly what their thinking tool set is in their head. And that gives you a sense of like what they're going to bring as a partner with AI when they start to work.
And we have this problem now, right? Like, not sure if you're reading the questions off the screen on the right.
I actually am not. I have no questions up. I'm staring at myself and you guys, and I'm just kind of...
Sorry.
Yeah.
Delightfully simple.
Yeah. I think it's more fun that way. Like, we get to kind of take the conversation where I want to go. Now, I did prep with ChatGPT. I absolutely prepped with questions, but then I was like, they're okay, and I'm just going to riff with it. So,
Yeah.
Interesting. Another question I have, I know we only have, a few minutes left here. I think one of the things that we haven't dug into yet that I hear a lot is, and maybe this is like half a design question, half an engineering question. So for the two of you together, like, it's going to be perfect. I hear a lot of talk, especially when I put out videos talking about new models. I'm going to do that for ChatGPT 5.2 here. People will say, what's the difference? I see the same chatbot. I see the same terminal. I see a different label. How do I know that this is actually better? And like, we've even had like comments from, I think, Sam and others that say chat is essentially a saturated use case. And I kind of agree. Like, I think it's mostly saturated out. How do you convey the significant, not significance, the wrong word, the step change that you get in capabilities over a 6-month or year period to someone who is seeing the same UI?
It's a good question. I mean, I think like it depends on the use case, right? Like, I think like what, like as a designer or design engineer, I kind of work with, different models, and then for some tasks I like one, for others I like the other, just like, many other products. Or if I'm in ChatGPT, if I'm asking like a super quick question, right, I'll just like leave it on auto or kind of, some low reasoning model. And if I'm really wanted to think, maybe I'll use Pro or something like that. So I think it's one of these things where you kind of like, you test it and it depends on the situation. That being said, like we have a bunch of research evals, so I think there are certain barometers that you can use, but we've kind of talked through this interview about, the different capabilities that different model steps unlock. And I think we have consistently seen that, right? Like models today, at least for coding, are like substantively different from where they are when I joined this team. So I think it's a case of just try many different ones, like, see what you like. Some things are good for different use cases. But yeah, I think like maybe one good mental model perhaps that people don't think about is, when thinking about these things, they think with a snapshot of where we are currently with how you interact with ChatGPT and models. And I think in 5 years' time, it's going to be very different, right? Like if you think about what models these new capabilities can unlock, different products will have very different experiences. You might, is chat always the best interface? Like, you might not be interacting with a model at all, but it's still doing work for you in the background. And in that case, right, model quality and the model that you're using is very different. So yeah.
To come back to that, where it's like that's code review is again an example of that, where it just happens in the background. If the model improves and, we know like the either it got faster or it's able to spot more things, it's like, yay, you just got an upgrade for free. You don't have to think about it. And, you just benefit from it like every day. And then Codex itself is a different product from chat. Agents benefit still like from a lot of improvements on like, we definitely see like whenever we improve on reliability, like frontier intelligence, how long it can go. But then it feels like we will need another product at some point as well, where you're not going to run Codex for like 3 days in your terminal. It's like maybe people will, right? But it's like, at what point do we have agents that just run forever?
Yeah.
And that, you interact with it. It's like, that's going to feel like very different. Maybe you text it from time to time. Maybe you were going to call it. And it's just like, we yet have to invent like the right product around this. Like the models are not there yet, but they will be.
Yeah.
And then that's going to be like, oh, wow. It's just like, we're like GPT-7, right? And it's like, it'll be like obvious. And in the meantime, it sort of feels like, oh, okay. It's like, it feels incremental at times. But then when you look back like 6 months ago, you're like, heck, like, none of this was possible.
Exactly. Like I did a video this morning about this idea that straight line extrapolation is surprisingly hard to experience in real time. Like you're sitting there and like you said, like people get used to the products so fast and people get disappointed and frustrated by the products. I vividly remember how excited I was working with ChatGPT 5 thinking and how it felt like a step change. And then I immediately, within 2 days, found a bunch of things that I didn't like about it, wanted to fix. And like, that's just how it goes, because that's how humans sort of scale our taste, I guess. And I think one of the things that I've been thinking about is, how do we take our human default, where we seem to assume a static world, and start to transition to a human default where we assume a dynamic world, where we're living on the slopey part of an S curve And like we have to think about rapid gains in capability as a default base case. All right. For our last couple minutes, do you have a question for me or the audience? Like, I know you guys are always hungry for voice of customers. There's something that's been bugging you that you would want to ask.
What are you curious to know?
I mean, I'm always curious, like how people use coding agents outside of coding. Like, you mentioned that maybe you use it, you use ChatGPT to get ready for the interview, but how do you use it in your day to day?
I love that. So I am a relentless omnivore when it comes to AI models, and I tend to jump around really quickly, but I have settled task groups that once I decide where I want them to live, I tend to put them there. And so right now I am using ChatGPT. Well, it was 5.1, now it's going to be 5.2 for a lot of the structuring and brainstorming and researching and thinking that I do as I start to think about pieces that I write, and what the stories are kind of and how it kind of comes together. I'll use Codex when I want, I call it like hard thinking mode. I think that it's been marketed like, I think ChatGPT 5.2 Pro or 5.1 Pro, like people talk about it and I've tried it out and I like it, but I think it is sometimes over expressive for what I need. And that's why I mentioned conciseness as a value I appreciate in Codex, is that Codex comes back and it doesn't give me 1,000 tokens. It just comes back with a really concise answer. And I love the legibility of that. And I kind of get addicted to it. And so when I need something that is a very clear, concise analysis, and it can be a financial analysis, it can be a project analysis, it can be an M&A analysis, it can be a doc analysis, it can be a response to something that is really complicated that I need to think through and I want to draft it out. Codex is great for all of that because it boils really cleanly, right? You get exactly what it boils down to, and it's really dependable that way. I get a lot of mileage right now out of the document tool creation or the tools used to create documents from Claude. I know they're the other guys, but they are definitely shipping well there. And just Opus 4.5 really, really, really does well on that. When I want a PowerPoint, when I want an Excel, it does well. I've been both amazed and also frustrated by using Notebook LM and Nano Banana 2 to, or really is it 3 or is it, no, it's 2. It's Gemini 3. Anyway, using it to ship PowerPoints because I don't get editability and I hate that, but I get all of these lovely graphics from Nano Banana and that's fantastic. And so I think we're in this place where people are, we're tool omnivores because we're desperate to get the best thing in the moment for the particular task. And we all tend to have like that list of paper cuts. Like I was like, I don't like the PowerPoint piece. I think Claude Opus 4.5 has good tool use, but at the same time, the ability to create decorated PowerPoints is not really there. I think you guys have a ways to go on PowerPoint creation right now. But the completeness that I'm seeing, like I'm doing some early work on ChatGPT 5.2 and like it spits out a very complete document. Like it is a complete answer that thoroughly answers the question. And so one of the things I preach a lot is like you must get really fingertippy with your models to actually be able to use them to solve problems in a way that's differentiated from just type something into a chatbot. So it's a long way of saying I have about half a dozen models and I use them all every single day, including like a bunch of OpenAIs.
Yeah, and then you have this like mental model of like, what is this model good for? What is this model good for?
That's right.
And there isn't yet this like, perfect model that like answers all your needs. And your needs changing. Yeah.
Because they keep changing. And that's the thing that you've emphasized that I really strongly agree with, is that if I were to try and boil this into a table, it would look incorrect because I have an evolving sense map of where these models are good and not good. And it's very fine grained. Like I have learned which models read handwritten tally marks well and which ones don't. because
when you refresh when you refresh that thinking, like, that knowledge, like when you allow yourself to say like, hey, let me try this other one
all the time. Like and that's, I think, one of the things that like people lean into with my channel is that I am extremely open to new models and new experiences, changing my priors. Because I think that you have to be at all helpful to people in evolving this landscape, because you have to assume that any given new model release from any major model maker could upend a key part of your workflow because it's just better. And you should not sit there and say, well, ChatGPT before didn't do this, so I'm not going to pay attention to this tool use capability. It's like, no, you should. You should assume that the model is fully capable of surprising you and test it carefully. So I think one of the things I've been thinking about is what we mean when we talk about useful work and what useful work looks like. And we've talked a ton about Codex, and obviously with Codex, useful work is poll reviews, PR reviews. It's coding. It's work that you can define in terms of the bits and bytes that the model outputs. It gets a little bit more complicated with other knowledge work, and so I'd be curious how you guys think about that, maybe beyond Codex, maybe looking at GPT 5.2.
I would say it's similar question and difficulty, like even just for coding. There are certain benchmarks like SweetBench. They're like super saturated by now. Like, do they really measure how much use you're getting out of the model, like in day-to-day use? And also, like, we talked about like how we're going beyond just like code generation, and then it's like helping you understand things, helping you like review, like deploy, like doing sysadmin tasks, and more things. So, helping you build like design prototypes. So it's all about like this economical value that you're able to create. And, OpenAI has like really worked hard to like on GDP-VAL, like 5.2, SODA on GDP-VAL. I think it's like interesting to go and like from really hyper specific saturated evals to a better understanding of like, how is this impacting the real world? Obviously no eval is perfect, but I think whenever a model like puts a new SODA on something that measures economical value, it's like worth taking a look at it.
Yeah, I appreciate that you called that out, because I think it gets at this idea that people get suspicious of benchmarks when they get reported on and you get close to 100%. It's like, okay, but what's another 2%? Whereas I think there's something around maybe an implicit measure of generalizability that you get when you get to some of these measures of economic impact. So GDP-VAL, I think, is a good one. Isn't there one around vending machines? That's another one that's sort of in that vein as well.
Yeah, it's a fun one.
Yeah, it's a cool one. Yeah, is it vending bench or vending?
Yeah. But with GDP-VAL, it's clearly not saturated yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's usually the cycle that you see with evals is, eval gets published, it gets traction, gets saturated. Like, it did measure something useful at some point, and then maybe after a couple of months or years, like it's not really measuring anything very meaningful anymore, because, every model is performing more or less like the same on it. And then you have a new one like GDP-VAL always like measuring something more interesting again. And given it's not saturated, like it's always interesting to pay attention to it. Vending bench is also a fun one.
Yeah, it sort of underlines the story that we've been sort of telling through this whole hour together, where we've talked about this idea that progress just keeps happening relentlessly with these models, and that there isn't a wall. And, contrary to popular reports, right? There isn't a wall. We've continued to see progress, and it's something that allows us to continue to publish new benchmarks because we keep knocking down the old ones.
Yeah, an interesting thing there is sort of like, what are the benchmarks of the future?
Mm-hmm.
And that would be pointless to have now, because every model would just score like 0.
Mm-hmm.
Like being able to be the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, for example, like, that would be a useful benchmark. Like, do we allow models yet to run like multi-billion-dollar corporations? Like, not quite. But I'm pretty sure at some point, we're going to have these kinds of crazy benchmarks. They seem crazy now, but like, they're not going to be crazy, like in a couple of years.
That's a really interesting sort of brain teasers. What are the evals of 2026 and 2027 that we're going to turn to as measures of value?
Thanks for having us, Nate.
Yeah, thank you. That was a good one to end on. This has been lots of fun, guys.
Thanks so much.
Next time.